Hi, I'm Tom Stevenson, and this is Human Resource Management, Lecture 1. Welcome to the course. Of course, we're going to be doing our synchronous live sessions weekly, so you'll see me live and we'll be able to discuss this, but a lot of the material will be in our recordings so that you can watch these ahead of class. And I would suggest you watch them ahead of class because what we're going to do is we're going to discuss some of the content in class. So the live discussions will be more in class. I'll review some of the key points in class, answer questions, and we'll have discussions on some of these areas, which should make the material come more alive to you and be more interesting that way. In this particular class, we're going to be looking at a number of things involved in human resource management, introducing some topical areas that become important. And I think with this course, I've taught this a number of years at University of Toronto. I think with this particular course, given that you're in a master's program, many of you have experience in the workforce. I find there's a great dichotomy of backgrounds in this course over the years. People come from a variety of different countries and cultures, and so there's a lot of what we'd call cultural norms that go on, and that makes the discussions much more rich when we meet live to discuss some of these particular areas, people bringing out their experiences and seeing how they apply in a North American environment, but also how they contrast with perhaps your own home country environment if you're from a different culture or background, which makes it really interesting to talk about. And so I like this quote here by Ken Robinson. Human resources are like natural resources. They're not just lying around the surface. You have to create the circumstances where they show themselves. And companies, the culture that's created within companies really is a result of how we interact with each other and what becomes overall more normal circumstances that occur. It can make the difference between a company being highly innovative or relatively static. It can make the difference between a company being more reserved or more open, closed environment, more open environment. Companies where people are willing to take chances and take some risks, where people are not willing to take chances and will try to hide failures, etc. So there's a lot of nuances that goes on, or what I would say space between the spaces as we look at human resource management. So we'll try to discuss a lot of things. There'll be a lot of tools, techniques, mental models that we'll discuss in this course that by the end of the course, I'd like to think that you'll have a lot of these tools and techniques and mental models that you can use, whether you're a manager or whether you're an employee in your future careers. You'll find that I tend to teach these courses not so much that, oh, you're going to get an A, a B, a C. I tend to teach these courses with the overall goal, given today's topic is goals, of you being able to use a lot of the tools, techniques out in the real world, that you'll be more observant of things that are going on in your work environment, and that will help to lead you to better understanding and also lead you to success over your career as you apply many of these tools, techniques, and mental models. So welcome to the course, and we can start to get going on this. So I don't know if you can see this over here, but there's a car in the water. When something happens, we tend to want to fix it. And so we're getting the car out of the water, and then something happens that we didn't plan for. And then, of course, we want to fix that, and we usually throw a lot of money at it, and we try to get things done fairly quickly. And as a result, more things happen. So, I'm sure that probably those maybe the first ones weren't photoshopped, but the next round was probably photoshopped. I'm hoping in that case. But in the real world, you sit back and think about things. When things go wrong, we tend to get into what we call reactive mode. And when we're in reactive mode, we're not really thinking about what we're doing. Daniel Kahneman, who wrote the book Thinking Fast and Slow, would say we have system 1 and system 2. And system one is kind of like the fight, flight, freeze sort of system. And when we get into reaction mode, we're determining, are we going to fight our way through this? Are we frozen? Or are we going to run? And the flight aspect. And sometimes reactive mode causes us to do quick thinking in system one. And that worked really well when we were out in the wilds and maybe we had a lion chasing us or that sort of thing. But in our more complex environments, it doesn't work quite as well because we're reacting to something that has a lot more complexity to it, and we're not thinking through all the different eventualities that can occur. So maybe like in the case of the crane, we're taking chances and risks that if we had thought them through, they wouldn't be, we could greatly reduce the probabilities or remove the probabilities of those occurring. So human resources, well, when we're dealing with people, it is a very complex subject, right? So humans are a very complex subject, and what works with one person may not work with another person. So that's why at the beginning I kind of said there's a lot of tools, techniques, and you'll also see in this course there'll be some disagreement. I might give a certain theory like Peter Drucker, management by objectives, and it's sort of we got to have goals and we got to follow this, 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 this. But then I'll also contravene some of that and I'll say, well, there's a downside to goals if we're not careful. These are the things we have to be careful about with goals. And and there's different theories that are out there that have been well researched, and it can give you some good ideas and perspective on things. So while goals are great, there's also some things we got to be careful about when we're instituting goals, because if we're not, they can be not so great. A lot of that thinking comes into this process and into this course. And we definitely don't want to run our business without thinking things through. We don't want to be all the time in system one. We may have certain things that we need to do in system one, but overall we want to be operating out of system two, where we've thought things through, we planned them out, and then of course things change and we can adjust, we can pivot, we can be agile in those areas as need be. So really, human resource management, when we think about it, nothing gets done without people. And so it really is the backbone of a business. We can talk about financial statements and the financial aspect of running a business. And true to course, we do have to make sure that we are minding our numbers and that we're profitable if we're going to sustain the business. But what is it at the root that actually gets us to do that? It's our people. And getting the best out of our people, getting them fully engaged is really what we're striving for in our business world and human resource management. So what are some of the key factors to success or failure? As I said, human resources are at the core of that, and they can help us develop a competitive advantage. Competitive advantages, what can we do better than somebody else? Why does somebody want to do business with us as opposed to somebody else? And we have to think about it in those terms. And a lot of people think about human resource management. Oh, there's a human resource department, or what we'll like to call very often today, people and culture, or people. Human resource management may not be the term that every company is using. They're all looking for different ways of describing it. But in essence, there are human resource departments, and they do come up with policies, procedures, the hiring we'll talk about later in the course, practices, training programs, etc., to ensure that you do have a vibrant core of people. But human resource management also involves a number of other factors that we need to consider. And generally, the most human resource management goes on between managers and the people that are working under them, or managers and managers if they're peer-to-peer. So in this course, we're really going to focus in on that level, which is going to be managers to their people. We'll talk about, obviously, the human resource department or people and culture department and how that interacts with managers. But I really want to think about it because this is an engineering class. You have engineering backgrounds. Very often you get promoted into management positions. Predominantly management positions are dominated very often by people that come from engineering backgrounds. but it's opening up a whole different skill set that you're probably not as used to. You're very, engineers tend to be very numbers oriented, very good at quantifying results. And so there's the soft side of human resources that we have to bring into the fold. And if we can bring that and complement that with your other skill sets, that's where you'll really, really excel in the real world. So, we'll start thinking about that. And when we think about that, there's what we call the management cycle. And it kind of follows this sort of curve that you'll see on the next slide, where really we talk about mission. Today we'll talk about mission, we'll talk about vision, we'll talk about core values. And what that means to a business, and how some businesses really take it to heart and some businesses just kind of give it lip service. So we'll try to bring in the real world aspects of what goes on, and some businesses just use it as a marketing ploy. But I like to think that some of the best and most successful businesses really take it to heart, and it helps them in the decision-making process. It helps you in the decision-making process. It helps employees when they have decisions to make, when they really know what's at the heart of this particular business. So it really sort of follows this process that you can sort of follow the bullets, deploy the resources, motivate staff, assess the results, and identify gaps, which is really quite extensive. We'll get back to that as we move through this slide set for today's lecture. So towards the end, I'll have one that sort of explains the whole cycle. For those of you that have project management backgrounds, I like to think of project management. You've got an individual project, and this is what you're cycling through. And there's this kind of feedback loop that you go through where you have a plan, you start enacting the plan, you get feedback, and then you change the plan to adjust. And project management is constant iterations. Well, business management is just at a higher level, and it's very, very similar in that way, that you've got a purpose for this business, and you've got goals for this business, and you're enacting those goals, and you're assigning resources to ensure that those goals can be accomplished. You're monitoring it. You're trying to motivate people, and we'll talk about that quite extensively in the course too. Motivation factors and extrinsic motivations, intrinsic motivations, and what's the best kind of way to motivate people. And as you'll see later in the course, there's a lot more to intrinsic motivations than has sort of been spelled out in popular theory or the way things are done. Everybody thinks it's like throw a carrot out in front of somebody with money and they'll be motivated. And there is some truth to that, and there are advantages to that we'll get into. But there's a lot of advantages to intrinsic motivation that doesn't get its full value because it's not talked about and it's not really thought about as much as it should be. So we'll get into those things. So really, as a business goes about fulfilling its mission, implementing resources, motivating staff, you then want to monitor. You want to see how you're doing. You want to assess how you're doing. You want to make adjustments. You want to make tweaks. You want to look at how you can continuously improve as an organization. If you're not continuously improving, you're actually getting worse as things go along. So you'll see how that becomes an important aspect of a business. If you don't continuously improve, you're kind of sitting still and the world is passing you by. So that's the identification of the gaps, and then filling those gaps, adjusting, and getting back through the cycle as you'll see. So starting off with the mission statement, it's really the purpose of the business. Why are we here? What is our purpose? It can be written in many ways. Some ways it can be fairly complex. Other ways it can be a pretty short, straightforward sentence. It should give stakeholders, and stakeholders are your clients, your employees, shareholders, if it's a publicly traded company, people that interact with the business, a community that may be impacted by the business. It should assess the expectations of the stakeholders so they have an idea how this is actually affecting them. I put up some fairly basic examples of mission statement because actually what I'm hoping is when we do the class synchronous or live, you will have had a chance to go check out some of your favorite businesses and what's their mission statement, what's their vision statement, what's their core values. Some companies don't have a mission or a vision, but they have core values. And look online and see what are some examples of companies. So usually people come back with ones like Apple or Amazon or Walmart or SNC-Lavalin, whatever. And they can be interesting discussions that we can have. So hopefully you'll check out some more. I'm not putting these ones up that they're this great mission statement. I just kind of pulled these ones out because I wanted you to kind of do a little bit of background research on that. For myself, I've done a lot of consulting work with some very large businesses, mostly in the construction area or the construction field, because my background is construction oriented, but I've worked with some very large businesses, and I have some interesting examples that I like to bring into the fold. One is Mattamy Homes, and I've done a lot of work with them, and their mission statement was best homeowner experience. Best homeowner experience. So I like to think of that in the way that they used it. Best homeowner experience, what it doesn't say is best home. You know, some builders might say best home. Some builders might say different things, most profitable business. You know, there can be different aspects that come into play, but theirs was best homeowner experience. And they really lived it and breathed it. At the time, they were being rated. There was J.D. Power. J.D. Power rates cars. They rate everything from cars to chainsaws. And at that time, they were rating home builders in the Greater Toronto area. In a lot of areas, they were rating them, but you could see in your particular geographic area how you were doing, and they would actually publish it in the Globe and Mail, the National Post, the Toronto Star. It was pretty widely publicized, and when it first came out, they were number 2. And you can be sure their owner, Peter Gilgan, he's not the type of guy that likes to walk around Toronto and say, we're the number 2 builder, right? So he actually put a lot of effort into making sure best homeowner experience, that it meant that. And so they looked at surveys, they looked at a number of factors of how they were doing, because that's the one thing, that's how J.D. Power makes their money, is that they sell the detailed information to the builders, and then they can look at that and see where they need to improve. And they basically looked at where they needed to improve, which was all the touch points that somebody goes through from when they purchase a home to when they move in. And they saw where there were weak points, and they looked at improving that. It was very interesting for me because even students, I had a lot of students on co-ops with them at the time, and I'd have them keep a journal, and I'd read the journals, and it would say things like, stopped and fixed flat tire, stopped and fixed flat tire. And I'm like, what are you, a mechanic or something? Why are you stopping to fix flat tires? And they say, oh, no, sir. The reason is that they train us on that, because if a homeowner came on site, we wanted to make sure that they weren't frustrated or upset that, you know, they just spent $1 million on a house and they got a flat tire. We wanted to make sure we helped them. And that can be, it's small little things. It's all the little things that go in to make sure that you have a happy customer. And that's how they will fill in the surveys. They'll remember those little things. Or maybe they showed up and they didn't make an appointment. Traditionally, they would be kicked off the site. They would make sure that, oh, well, we've got an extra hard hat for you here. We've got a vest. Take you very quickly, and please next time make an appointment. That's quite different than being kicked off the site. You didn't make an appointment. So it's those little interactions and how you work with your clients that make a big difference. Now, you can't just do those things and have them happen. You have to make that part of your strategy, and you have to make that part of your goals, and then you have to train people, and you have to set a culture that's going to be responsive that way. Which is not always that easy to change on a dime if you've got a culture that's quite different than that. So best homeowner experience described what they intended to do, and then they made sure that they had goals and measurements in place to do that. By the way, the next year after they did implemented all the training to make sure that this would come to fruition, they won the J.D. Power by quite a large margin. So mission statement examples. I won't stay on this too long. I'll let you can always freeze the frame and take a look at this Coca-Cola one. Goes on a little bit. There's other ones here. that you can check out. But as I said, I usually look for ones that are interesting, and then if you know a little bit about the company, do they actually follow it? Some companies have a mission statement like British Petroleum, BP. They had one that was, "We're the green oil company." Probably not the best thing to do when you have that, that disaster that went on in the Gulf of Mexico. So you have to be kind of careful about what you do or what you say as far as mission statement, because that could actually be negative if you're saying something and then it's perceived that you're not doing that. That can be an opportunity for media, that can give the wrong impression to employees, etc. So if you're going to say that, you really want to do everything possible that you are representing that, as opposed, you'd be better not to say it at all if that's the case, if you're not intended to do it that way. I always think of one where years ago, and we'll talk about this in other parts of the course, and I've got nothing against Ford. I actually like the history of Ford, but at the time, they had where quality is job one in the early 1990s. Every commercial was quality was job one, and I had a Ford Taurus at the time, and I can tell you, quality was not job one. Every time that car would break down, and you bring it to the dealer, and they kind of say, "Oh, that's the way it is. This is how this car is." Quality was not job one, but they kept saying it and saying it and saying it. It was around the time that the Japanese auto manufacturers were really coming into prominence, where quality was job one. So better not to say it if you're not doing it. It takes a long time to sort of lose that sort of representation. I will say that they have improved their quality a lot as a result of having to do that, but best to improve it and say it when it's improved than to say it when it's not really there. So those are some of the aspects that you can think about with mission statements. Vision statements are looking forward, so you're thinking far out into the future, as opposed to what's our purpose. Usually, if you can make a mission statement something that sticks for a long period of time, it's not something you want to change very frequently. Vision statement might change more frequently than a mission statement. Core values is another one that should stay or stand the test of time. So you're trying to make it something that's more representative of a period. So that's an idea. Like best homeowner experience is pretty good for a company like Mattamy Homes, whether they build houses, whether they build condominiums. Condominiums are a lot more prominent in big urban centers now. It can stand the test of time that way. Vision statement, it may change over time. Again, I'll use an example of Mattamy Homes because they were pretty good at this. Their vision statement was to be the best home building brand in North America. Best home building brand in North America. At the time, they only really built houses in the Greater Toronto area, and here you are saying you're going to be the best home building brand in North America. You can't be the best home building brand in North America if you only build houses in the Greater Toronto area. We're a big area, but it's not enough to say you're the best brand in North America. So that meant that that's part of their goals. That's their long-term vision. Well, that meant that they're going to have to open up in other markets. And it didn't say best home building brand in Canada. It could have, but there said best home building brand in North America. Well, in North America, then that means you got to be looking into the United States. And so then they had to look at, well, we're going to open up where? So that meant that expansion into like Florida, into Arizona, into Minnesota, into a bunch of different states, and in Canada, like Alberta, and like other markets in like Calgary and Edmonton and Toronto and Ottawa and other markets. So you start expanding further, and then also that you're going to be like in the top 2 or 3 in each one of those markets. So you're not going to be, number 25 in a number of those markets as far as how people view your business. So vision is looking forward over a period of time. And sometimes they can be construed in different ways. Probably one of the most recognizable mission statements that you might see is like the mission, so the moon mission, and that was kind of a vision and a mission and had its purpose, right? And so Kennedy in the early 1960s, and you can, I'm sure, view it on YouTube. We'll send a man this decade, well, it was the 60s, a man this decade and return them to the moon and return them safely back to Earth. And so it was time bound, it had a time period on it, it was looking forward, it said very clearly what the purpose was, to send them to the moon and return them safely this decade. So it was kind of a very encompassing but motivating statement, reaching statement that kind of was a catalyst for the United States at that time. Strategic vision is really getting down to the aspirations, charts the strategic path for the future. Where are we trying to go? Steers the energies of the employees in a common direction, molds the organizational identity, is distinctive and specific to a particular organization. Avoids, it's you don't want to just copy and paste somebody else's mission and vision. You want it to be meaningful to you, right? So that's the other thing. If you copy and paste it, it might look okay for marketing purposes, but if it's not really unique to you and it's not really communicated, it should be something that the CEO or the leader really uses to tell a story about the business. And so that's where it triggers strong emotions, challenging, uncomfortable, reaching. So you're really tying that in that way, strategic. Again, some examples, but I won't get into going through that. I'd rather when you take some time and look at some very interesting examples, and we'll discuss that in the class. I think that makes it more rich. Core values, that's really what what's the heart of your business. It's a guide for your processes. It clarifies that we are what we are as a people and a business, and what the business stands for. How the business behaves. It can tie into those aspects of belief. A company that I do a lot of work with, Ellis Dawn, they don't really call it their core value, but I definitely would say it is one of their core values, and they definitely have it on most of their marketing materials, but I think that they actually live and breathe it. And it is, we build great relationships. We build great relationships. So what does that mean? It means that when you got decisions to make, you're going to think about the relationships you have with your employees, with your subcontractors, with your clients. They even have a subcontractor bill of rights. So that means, and you can even go and look it up online if you want, Ellis Dawn subcontractor bill of rights. It's how their subcontractors will be treated. This is like a core value. We don't want to mistreat the people that we work with. We want the people that we work with to want to work with us. We want to have really good relationships with them so we can get the best prices. We can have the best subcontractors. We can build the best relationships. We can do the best work. We can have the most satisfied clients. So it all kind of pyramids and builds into each other, and it's like all these little neural networks that feed each other that way. So core values is a very positive aspect. A lot of businesses think in those kind of terms, and it helps in decision making. It's kind of like I think about how employees think when they make decisions. If they know that their core value is really to be a servant to their clients, and they have been emboldened to make certain decisions that may contravene if they had very detailed policies, but it's for the best of a situation for their client, then that really is serving the core values of that business. I think of WestJet and Air Canada in a lot of ways. And I've got nothing against Air Canada again, but I know when I fly WestJet, when there's a problem, it tends to be a pretty nice, easy kind of process with whoever I'm dealing with, because they have a lot more autonomy to make certain decisions. They don't have to go up through the ranks and policies and procedures and are nervous about contravening things, because their core value is really to serve their clients at a very high level. I can remember where I was traveling to Kelowna to do some speaking and some corporate work, and our suitcases were damaged in the flight, and it was a WestJet flight. For whatever the reason, these hardcover suitcases, they were all damaged, And we were kind of upset. And I was thinking, oh, this is going to take a lot of time to sort this out and paperwork, because I've dealt with other airlines that way, and it's really a pain. Not at the WestJet in Kelowna. It was sort of like, oh yeah, you're right, they are damaged. Oh, no problem, we'll get you new ones. And the person behind the counter opened the door to a storage area, and in the storage area was nothing but suitcases. And they said, oh, take whichever two you want. And they were really good quality suitcases. They were better than the ones that got damaged. And I think all we had to sign one sheet, and we were on our way. We just had to transfer the clothes, and very simple process. You remember those things. I was at a presentation with one of the founders of WestJet, and they told the story of where one of their passengers was getting married, and they had a wedding dress, and it got lost. And I think it was in Toronto airport, and it was lost. And the wedding was not that long away. And the wedding, I guess they were going to drive up north somewhere, maybe about a 3-hour drive up north. And so they'd left without the dress, very upset. And they were searching everywhere. They found the dress. And one of the employees just grabbed the dress, hopped in their car, and drove 3 hours to bring it so that it would be there on the time of the wedding. Somewhere else, they might not do that. They might put it in a box and ship it UPS, but then you wouldn't be sure it would get there in that time, or FedEx. Maybe it'd be late. This way they were sure. And you know what? The employee didn't feel like they were going to be punished for it. They were actually celebrated for it. So it's a different kind of environment that the core values is setting, and the culture is setting within the company. So really having core values that people understand, it helps to lead them to how they make those decisions. One of my favorite ones is Merck, and their core value to preserve and improve human life, corporate social responsibility, unequivocal excellence in all aspects of the company, science-based innovation, honesty, integrity, profit from work that benefits humanity. But at its root, the founder, who was a researcher back in, I think, the early 1900s or 1920s, built it on to preserve and improve human life. All right, so you've got this big publicly traded company. You've got this core value that when the company started, it was just a small entity and was growing. And you had a founder that sort of had this perception that they want to preserve and improve human life. It wasn't, we want to make a buck and become rich. This was at the core. And so then you have a group of researchers. They're developing this treatment that would be utilized in, I think it was veterinary work or some related area. And they discovered that this treatment would probably be extremely helpful, if not get rid of this blind river disease. And you can look it up, but blind river disease is like a parasite, and it actually is very painful, and it leads people to become blind. Millions of people actually suffer from it in sub-Saharan Africa. It's probably why we don't hear about it here so much. And so they found this treatment that would actually, potentially get rid of this, but they would have to test it, and millions of dollars. You can imagine what goes on with COVID vaccinations and the process that's going on involved in that. And this would be this long approval process, which would take a chunk of their research dollars to do. But the scientists were pretty sure that this was going to work. And you're the CEO, and you're looking at this. Yeah, okay, but if it does work, sub-Saharan Africa, not a lot of money there, very difficult, the distribution systems. How would we get it to the people that would need it? So not a moneymaker. But then he started thinking, going back to the previous slide, to preserve and improve human life. This could make a significant difference to millions of people in those areas. And he thought, if I'm just looking at this from a financial perspective, it's a no. But if I start thinking about it from our core values, and what would it say to these scientists who are all excited working for us that see this potential, and we say no because it's going to cost too much. So the CEO, Roy Vagelis, at the time decided to go ahead with it. And they went ahead with it, and it did make a significant difference. And they did figure out how they're going to distribute it, and it was a huge success. And he said, contrary to what he ever thought, it didn't make millions of dollars, obviously. Well, in the kind of money that was spent on it compared to what it was making. But he said what was surprising was it spread how they did this, and they were able to get the best research scientists in the world who were really all about their research, not about making Merck, more wealthy. But as a result, it tended to work out because they were able to get the best researchers in the world, and it was easier to attract. And you were getting the people that their heart and soul was into the research and who were very good at what they do, which any kind of pharmaceutical company would want. And so at the end of the day, it actually, even though that wasn't the reason, sticking to the original purpose, the core value, actually helped Merck in a lot of ways. So again, these are some examples. And by the way, when I quote companies, big conglomerates, there's always good things and bad things about every company that you can find. But you have to look for where these work and how this works and what this sets about the culture and how the culture goes forward and how it leads them to a lot of the success that they have. Strategic vision versus mission. So mission, as we said, that's the current product. It's what your purpose is. Your vision concerns the future path. So you can sort of differentiate between the two as thinking of one as your current and the other as where you're moving, where you're going to as a business. And that'll help you sort of frame things when you think about it. And core values kind of like, this is how we feel about things. And helps us in our decision-making process. And the other thing we're going to talk a lot about is people are very resistant to things that are different or things that cause change. And I'll talk about this a little bit in another class. There's a reason for that. People have worked long and hard at becoming good at something, and they don't want to shift. They're also very nervous about it, right? So you get a lot of pushback or blowback when you try to implement change. And so if you're going to be a leader in a company where you need to make change, and trust me, today you need to make lots of changes because the world changes very, very, very fast. We have external things that happen that change things fast. We have new innovations, technological advancements that change things very fast. We have pandemics and things that change things very fast. So we have to be able to pivot and be agile with these things. But then you have people that are more resistant to change. And the other thing you'll recognize is that people that have become very successful doing things often like the way that they did them, and they don't want to let go of them too soon. People like myself, you've worked like myself. You've worked decades at getting very good at being live in front of a classroom, and now I have to talk to a computer screen, and I have to be energized, and I have to try to, that takes a bit of a learning curve, to be sure. It's one that's going to take me a while to really get used to. Even though I've been doing this for a few years, it takes a while to get up to the same kind of success that you have in a live environment. But much better to do that because things change, and you have to change with them, and you have to be able to roll with them, and you have to be able to practice what you preach in lots of ways. So reiterating the basis for the new direction. Why are we doing this? Clearly right now there's a lot of reasons why online education, you want to make it more accessible, you want to go to a broader audience, you want to make sure that people don't have to, in the case of a pandemic, that they don't have to put themselves at risk, and you want to be able to make it such that it can work in different time zones, as people may not be able to travel so easily. So there can be a lot of basis for new direction, and you want to be able to communicate that effectively with the people that are going to be involved in the process. And you want to, if employees have concerns, you want to address those head on and understand them, have some empathy for why they may be feeling that way. You want to calm their fears. You don't want to stoke their fears necessarily, and you want to try to lift spirits, energize, engage, and you want to tell everybody how things are going as you proceed with them. That's the other thing that you want to think about. So when we think about setting goals, funny little animation there, purpose of setting goals, and what is the purpose, and converting our vision into specific targets. Because you got this high level thing, best homeowner experience. Well, what does that mean? Because if we don't break it down into smaller increments, high level goals and then smaller level goals and things that we can measure, how are we going to get there? It's nice to say things like the best homeowner experience, but that doesn't mean anything unless we can break it down into targets, and then we can move forward from those targets. So when we think about goals, some of the characteristics represent commitment to achieve specific performance targets, spell how much of what kind of performance by when. They need to be quantifiable, measurable, have a deadline, be what we'd call time bound. One of the people that I'll bring into this would be Peter Drucker. He kind of came up with the concept in the late 60s, management by objectives, MBO, management by objectives, which really means that you got to set targets. You got to have goals to get there. Later in the course, I'll bring up Edwards Deming's, and he kind of goes against Peter Drucker with the aspect of targets and goals. And Deming was a quality control engineer and really into continuous improvement. And he felt that certain goals push people to meet the goal at the expense of quality. And those of you that have studied project management, time, cost, quality, you have your scope of work and how they interact. You shorten time, put pressure on people to keep within a time and a budget. Then usually what's going to happen is quality suffers. So there's that push-pull that goes on. But to be sure, having targets and having goals has been researched in many ways, and it's definitely very, very helpful for companies to be able to achieve the success in those areas. Locke and Latham did a lot of research in goal setting, and a third person that did research in this area, Albert Bandura, did a lot of research in this area. And so they kind of came up with clarity, challenge, commitment, feedback, task complexity. These are elements that you got to have to motivate people to achieve goals. In other words, it has to be very specific. It can't be that you don't understand what it is. To be profitable in 5 years, that's not really specific enough. What is your target? Like, what kind of profitability do you want to have? Do you want to have profit of 10% of sales with a sales amount of $20 million? What is it? It needs to be specific. And if it's something that you could just skip through the day and do, it's probably not going to be challenging enough. So you want to make it challenging so it's not too easy, but it's also not too difficult that you have no hope of making it. If you feel that you can't possibly do it, then that will defeat it as well. But challenging to be sure. Commitment, that would be Bandura's big aspect. The person has to be committed, and they have to have the confidence that they can do it. So self-efficacy, confidence that they can actually achieve the goal is important. And you need feedback. So best way to get feedback is people that are better than you at it, giving you feedback. Measurement, being able to measure how you're doing along the way. Think of a project schedule, and you have milestones. And how are you at milestone number 1? You get feedback. We're a week late. We're X amount of dollars over budget. These are the quality expectations. So you want to have feedback as you go along so that you can understand that you're making that progress. So really a simpler way of thinking about it is what we call SMART goals. And it just spells out the acronym SMART. Specific, like I said, measurable, so something that you can measure and see how you're doing as you go along. So if you break it down into tasks and you can measure how you're doing in those tasks, then that makes it very effective that way. Agreed upon, so if you want somebody to do something, one of your employees, if they're not really agreeing that they can do it, or they think they can't attain it, you know what? They're not going to. You've got to make sure you've got their buy-in and agreement. And if they're not agreeing to it, maybe you want to find out, well, what's the issue? So maybe that's a roadblock that you can help to clear. Maybe they're not agreeing to it because that means they have to rely on somebody in another department, and that person in the other department never gets anything done. Well, then maybe you can set that and clear that obstacle with whoever's the manager of that person in the other department. That would be part of your role. But if you don't know that and you don't have that feedback, then they don't believe they can do it. It's probably not going to happen. So it's very worth it from that perspective. And then realistic resource based, I would look at it from the perspective of, all right, so they're agreeing to it. Do I believe they can do it based on their past history? Is there something else I need to do to ensure this is going to get done? I look at it from that way. You'll see that if you look online and do that, check online, there's a lot of different interpretations, especially for the A and the R of SMART. But I usually break it down that way because I think it's the most easy to understand. One, agreed upon is that person looking at it from their perspective. Realistic, resource-based, you're looking at it based on their history and how they're able to do that. And time-based. If you don't have a time on it, it's not going to get done. You know yourself, your students, and if you don't have a time frame to put in that assignment, you don't have the same kind of motivation. There other priorities will fill that space, and that'll get pushed to the side. We'll talk about the Eisenhower matrix in the next class or the class after that. And the last one, as we said, the Albert Bandura comment, you got to have commitment. If people aren't committed to it, they don't really care about it, they're not interested in it, they're not engaged with it, then that's not going to happen either. So that all ties together. I would say the agreed upon attainable part is where you got the self-efficacy. People have to have the confidence that they can do it. So you put all that together, that gives you what should be involved in developing goals. I see too often people come up with goals and they're missing a lot of those elements in it. And that makes it a big reason why people aren't as successful. Having this spelled out greatly raises the likelihood of you being successful at reaching those goals. And companies will have all kinds of areas, financial goals, tying to dollars and sustainability, and strategic goals, outcomes focused on improving long-term competitive business success. But again, there can be goals from each area. There's different ways that businesses organize and frameworks that businesses organize themselves. But if you have clearly laid out goals, it helps to definitely accelerate businesses' success. So businesses, when they're looking at where their opportunities are, etc., they have to think about the external environment. And there's all of these different external forces that play on a business's ability to do things. And in the external environment, a business can't really, determine or change. No business is big enough necessarily to change these, but they can't. And if they are, then usually there's some sort of political process going into place to limit that business's influence, so they don't have a total monopoly on things. But international forces, things that go on with other countries, trade agreements, things of that nature, social forces, climate change and social force to be more efficient, to be less, to produce less carbon, to have a lot of influence that way, definitely pushes businesses that way. And of course, that can tie to political forces because people get elected perhaps based on the social forces and trying to push together political change. Political forces, you can think during the pandemic in the US, sort of the difference between mask wearers and non-mask wearers kind of being identified, Republican or Democrat. Political force. Economic forces, if we've got a down economy, you didn't cause this, but you have to respond to it. So economic forces, technological forces, if you're a company and the technology that's brought you to where you are is suddenly changing, that's going to have a huge impact on your business. Do you go out of that sector of business? Do you go into another sector? Do you advance yourself with this technology? Are there other opportunities? How's that going to change the way that you do things in future. In construction industry, technological force might be building information modeling. Technological forces in the movie industry, well, you can think of Blockbuster, where you go and rent films as compared to Netflix, how you can just do it all online and you didn't have to return things, and what that did to that particular industry. We'll talk about some of those elements in other parts of the course. Geophysical forces, where we're located, and some of the conditions and weather conditions, etc., that can impact our business. And demographic forces, aging population, what they purchase, what they buy. That would be a good example. So we want to think about planning long-term goals, strategies, and objectives. We set goals, we set objectives to reach the goals, we build on strengths while improving areas of weakness, and we look for opportunities and threats and conduct a SWOT analysis. So as I was saying, SWOT refers to the aspect of the company's strengths. Where is this company particularly strong at what it does? What are its strengths? Its strengths can very well be the knowledge base of its people. Very often that's the case. Its weaknesses. So where is it vulnerable? Again, weaknesses could be its people too. Is the demographic older? Have they not maybe kept up with the changes that have been going in the external environment? Is it overly exposed to technological change, or less overly exposed to technological change? Just based on the industry it's in, that can have a dramatic effect, and it depends on the technological change that's going on at the time. Opportunities. Well, I always think about opportunities as the aspect of, well, you got strength, but it also leads to opportunities, because there may be things that you can tap into based on your strength that will make you have a competitive advantage over other companies. Often companies don't recognize their own strengths and don't see the opportunities that are present. That's how sometimes you can see a company that's a market leader in one area and a new technological form comes out, yet they don't really seize upon that opportunity. When they had the financial capability, they had the knowledge base, they had the brand, yet for whatever the reason, they don't tap into that knowledge base. It could be, or that area of change. It could be that they're more resistant to change and they're very sort of satisfied with the success they've had in a particular area, and they don't want to divest themselves of their focus in that money-making area, but eventually that money-making area may disappear. I usually think of that when I think about Kodak, who invented the digital cameras, and very strong marketplace brand. And as I mentioned, they invented the digital camera, yet they didn't really capitalize on it. They didn't really invest in it. They were making too much money in film at the time, and they thought it was a lower quality area, which, as we all know, the quality just kept improving, and the technology got better and better and better, that everybody eventually has it on their phone. It's very ready to use and easy to use. And of course, it pretty much eliminated the film industry, or made it such a small, specialized sector that a company like Kodak, which employed over 150,000 people worldwide, was humbled. And I recognize that as somebody who, as a business, used to do a lot of construction projects and that with Kodak, and we used to do millions of dollars worth of work a year. And I would have never thought that that area that they currently have down at Eglinton and Old Weston Road, between Keele Street, would become derelict and would now be part of the new station for the Eglinton Crosstown, but really there's no Kodak left. Definitely that's looking at what opportunities, and of course what I just was mentioning too, threats. What are the threats that are approaching a business? And again, if you see certain threats, it may mean that you have to make changes to your overall vision, where you want to take the company, make adjustments, and then that leads down to goals, and goals leads to do we have the resources to actually do this work? And if we're lacking, what's our hiring practices to bring on board those particular resources with that knowledge base? Or do we retrain our existing workforce? Or do we train and advance our smart knowledge base so that we can better pivot and adjust and grow in those particular areas? So a SWOT analysis, which is a tool, helps a business to sort of identify its own strengths, its own weaknesses, its own opportunities, and threats that are out there. The internal environment of the organization, if it's a one-person operation, it can be very simple, right? So it's not hard to communicate where the vision is and the goals are so much if you're one person. It's quite a different story if you're 1,000 people or 3,000 people, or like I mentioned with Kodak, 150,000 people. How do we convey that, and how do we organize that, and how do we communicate that so that we're all rowing the boat in the same direction and that we're not really sort of contravening ourselves? And if we're just going in every direction with no plan and no sort of vision of where we want to go, or it's not well communicated, that can be a problem. So it gets more complex the more people that you have in an institution, of how we go about communicating this strategy and how we go about defining the goals and ensuring that we can actually measure them. So are they specific enough? Can we measure them? And can we get the buy-in of the people that are involved and the confidence levels that are required? There's an excellent book called Good to Great. It's written by Jim Collins. It was written, I believe, around 1999. And it's one of those books, you can go into Chapters or Barnes and Noble, and it's still on the bookshelves right on the front when you enter the store. It's a perennial bestseller. And it looks at companies, what made good companies great companies. And they did a lot of research into what were some of the elements that made good companies great companies. And I find the book really good. There's a business course I teach, and I use that book. One of the interesting things I find about it is that it looks at a very select few companies. Like, it took the whole sort of publicly traded companies of the S&P 500, and it narrowed it down under a certain criteria. The criteria was something like a company had to be had moved from a good company, so it had to be existing. It had to be sort of a reputation of good, and then it kind of had to sort of take off and really do well over a period of longer than 15 years, because they wanted to have different CEOs transfer the head of the company, so it survived, and it was like doing great work over the watch of more than one CEO. Very few companies actually satisfied that criteria. And but what I find interesting is, as I said, is it was written in 1999, and there's a number of those companies you could say were good to great to gone. A number of them are no longer exist. They went bankrupt or what have you. So that's another premise that you should think about in this course, is that you're only as great as what you've been doing most recently. It's not good to great forever. Companies just have to make some fatalistic errors that sort of they bet the farm, or they missed a change, and that company is either weakened enough that it gets bought or taken over, or goes bankrupt or out of business. Very, very few companies have survived over 50, 60, 70 years. Very, very few. If you're looking at hundreds of years, usually you're looking at beer companies that have survived long periods of time. But from the early days of the Dow Jones, I don't think there's very many that are still around. Probably one of them that would be recognizable would be General Electric. It was Edison Electric at the time, but the list is very short. Let's put it that way, that survived. Walt Disney obviously has been a company that's been around since, I guess, the late 30s. That's done really well. But good to great anyways. What he found, we'll talk about this later in the course, what he calls a level 5 leader. And one of the things that he says about good to great companies was that they spent a lot of effort getting the right people on the bus. It's a nice analogy. So you get the right people on the bus, you get the wrong people off the bus, get the right people and put them in the right seats, the right positions, and then you just decide where you're going to drive the bus. So it's kind of a good analogy. It's maybe a little bit different than, you're thinking of the CEO sits down, like I mentioned with Merck, and sort of has this core value that drives the company. But the thought process is that you have a lot of very talented people. Ensure that you've done a good hardcore selection process. If you've got them in the wrong position, you try to get them in the right position where they can excel, they can engage, and do their best work. And then they will be a great asset to help you decide where you want to drive the bus. So setting the vision of where, or the course of where you want to take this business. So the key point is that who questions come before what questions, getting the right people before exactly where we want to go, and debate it openly, before strategy, before organization structure, before tactics. First who, then what, as a rigorous discipline consistently applied. And that's the other thing with great companies. They are very consistent in their approach. They're not kind of all over the board and scattered. So that management cycle that I talked about in the first few slides, where we talked about mission and we talked about resources and we talked about going through the process, it's ensuring that resources such as people have clarity on what it is that they're supposed to do, and they have the funds and the machinery, equipment that's required to be able to implement the strategies that are spelled out from the mission and the vision, and then the goals, and then the strategic methodology that's going to be used, and have the authority to actually do that work and assign that work and monitor that work, and people are held accountable to what they're doing. So they have some clarity on what they're supposed to do, and they've been involved in that process, following the good to great process. And they have the authority to take action on specific responsibilities, and then held accountable to their success or failures. And also the other thing we'll talk about failures is there's a certain acceptance that there will be failures, as long as there's learning that's coming out of those failures, so that that can be redeployed in a manner that will be more successful in the future. So from that, also, those employees are then expected to try to figure out ways to motivate staff. Now, I'm going to be talking about motivation in this course a fair bit. It should be recognized that somebody like Jim Collins, who wrote the book Good to Great, and used that philosophy, the analogy of get the right people on the bus and the wrong people off the bus, would use the idea that, well, you don't have to motivate people if you hire the right people, because they're already motivated. We'll talk about Hertzberg and Hertzberg's motivator hygiene theory later. There are things we can do to motivated people that actually demotivates them. So we definitely as a business don't want to do that. But it's much easier to get somebody that's really engaged, excited about something, than it is to try to get somebody that's kind of just going through the motions and not that excited. And we have all seen those types of people. We've been served by those types of people. Sometimes you get served by somebody that's really excited about what they do, and they could be a Starbucks barista, and it's actually an enjoyable experience and makes you want to come back. And you've been served by somebody that's like could care less, and it's not exactly engaging for you to want to be a repeat customer. So hiring the right people for sure is important, but also there's a number of factors that we can do to help engage them to their fullest amount. And very often employees today are not engaged to their fullest amount. So trying to pull some levers that might assist in that way, and trying to better understand, engage with your employees, is something that we'll fundamentally talk about in this course. So if we've done that, we've got to see how we're doing. We've got to assess results. We've got to measure how we're doing on a continuing basis and see, because no plan is perfect. There's always opportunities for improvement. And if something's not working, maybe we can tweak it to make it work. If it's absolutely not working, maybe we want to try a different strategy. So there's results that we can analyze that are very measurable. And there's results that are more qualitative or subjective, where We want to measure somebody's satisfaction level or those types of things. Quantitative is something, we can clearly measure by measurable results, data points on productivity, on quality systems, on rework, and things like that. So we want to look at both and we want to see how we're doing on those particular results. And if we find gaps, then we want to look at those gaps and we want to analyze them and figure out how we can redeploy and adjust our resources to better fill those gaps, correct those gaps, make course corrections, and bring us back on track. So it's really measuring what our plan was, what our goals and expectations was, and mapping that and measuring against that. Those that have done project management, you'll know basically when you update, you have a baseline for a project or a schedule. You're measuring against that baseline to see how you're doing and where the gaps are, and then you're making adjustments in the other work that's coming up so that you can fill those gaps. And of course, we still need to look at our mission and vision periodically, and vision more so, to make sure that it's in alignment with changes that are going on in the external market and that it's a good fit so that we can keep everything even keel and going where we need to go, or if we need to change directions for a variety of reasons, that something that we had as an originally goal, we might have to throw it out because of changes in the external environment that no longer make this goal viable or understandable or acceptable. You could imagine if you're in the aviation sector in January and you've developed a series of goals for 2020 for your staff, etc. I think you could pretty much throw all that out the window once everything got grounded and the industry changed overnight, right? So you have to be willing to make adjustments, and you have to be quick to pivot and agile to pivot under certain circumstances where it's required. So those are things that would change that sort of cycle when you're identifying and assessing results, right? So there might be changes that would mean that you have to relook at this, relook at the strategic plan, redevelop the goals, plan and organize the strategies again. And so that's a possibility. Those events aren't something that happen every year. Like, this is very uncommon what's been going on lately, but these things do happen. You have recessions, you have changes in the market, you have industries go out of business for a variety of reasons. So we have to be able to understand how this all kind of fits and into the overall process. So there is this process where we've got to plan and we've got to deploy and lead through the process, control and monitor, see where our gaps are, and then respond. And then it's a continuous cycle that goes on in the management cycle. So that's kind of the way things go through in most businesses. It's kind of the way things go through in most projects too. So this sort of process is very common. There's other variables to it, the Toyota system, plan, do, check, act. There's a whole bunch of different related systems that we can bring up and talk about during this course. So hopefully that's giving a good clarity on where that's taking things. And a couple of things that I would put out there now before we actually meet in person. So I'm hoping you've had a chance to look at this before we meet in person. Our synchronous class, our live class. Check some examples of different mission, vision, core value statements. Write down some that you find interesting and what your thoughts are and why you find that interesting, good, bad, or indifferent. Sometimes you'll see a mission and it's like, this doesn't seem like this company. My experience with this company is something totally different. Or this does seem the way that this company behaves, acts, and puts things through. Or maybe you have some anecdotal comments on that. Think about goal theory, how it can assist you in developing your career. How could you apply that to your own personal career? And discuss some goals, how goals have helped you to achieve things in your life. Any common elements that helped you to succeed, and why did they help you? So think about those in those terms. And when were you at your best when you actually sort of set out? And what were some of the factors that you believe that led to that success? And what do you struggle with in meeting goals? And what tips do you have in overcoming these strategies? So number one is trying to identify some of the things that you struggle with when you're going after a goal. And by identifying some of the things that you struggle, what tips might you have for others that probably have the same issues in overcoming these struggles? And we'll have that as part of our reverse classroom sort of thing when we meet up live and we start discussing some of these points. So for now, I'm Tom Stevenson. Have a wonderful day. If you want to see other related videos I have on my YouTube site, you could always click the subscribe button, and then I'll bring up other videos. Like I do have other videos that are probably more detailed on goals and visions and different things like that. If it's of interest, you don't have to do that for this particular course unless I assign a particular video, but it might be of interest for some of you, because I have to believe that you took this course as an offering because it was of interest to you, and you can see how this can add value to yourself personally. And as I said, students that kind of embrace this course that way, I think they meet with a lot more long-term success as a result of taking this course, and that would be my goal here for you. So have a wonderful day, and we'll see you in class soon enough. I'm Tom Stevenson, and bye for now.